We're talking about how climate change is causing sea levels to rise, and a World Summit on Climate Change is about to take place in Paris. But ABC7's Steve Newman shows us firsthand how it is already having an impact on our beloved Suncoast.
When I walked this same stretch of North Lido each evening with my dog back in the late 1960s, things look pretty much the same as they do today. Sure, there are a lot more high-rises over on Longboat Key and mansions here on Lido. But one thing you might not have noticed over the past 50 years is a slow but steady rise in sea level. And if that rise continues, it could endanger the life we've come to love here in our seaside paradise and the thriving economy it supports.
Parts of Florida, especially Miami, have already seen an increase in coastal flooding. That's because of an ocean level that's risen by up to a foot during the past century. In Sarasota, plans were announced just last month to divert the worsening floodwaters that now swamp low-lying City Island just about every time even a brief storm passes. But what would happen to the Suncoast as a whole if current sea level rise predictions come true?
Well, predictions range from 3 feet to 6 feet by the end of this century, by 2100, and that's a considerable amount.
NOAA, the parent agency of the Weather Service, has prepared an interactive online map that reveals what could happen to coastal areas as ocean levels rise during the decades to come. In the heart of Sarasota Bay, a rise of only 2 feet would submerge part of St. Armand's and northern Siesta Key. A rise of 3 feet would bring more of St. Armand's underwater, as well as the downtown Sarasota waterfront. It would also cause considerable inundation on Siesta Key. If the rise were to continue to 4, 5, and 6 feet, which is at the top end of predictions within the lifetimes of children alive today, most of the keys would be gone. At 6 feet, the shoreline would be vastly different, with neighborhoods like Golden Gate Point and Harbor Acres all but gone from the landscape. Much smaller rises would swamp western Manatee County. At only 2 feet, the heart of Anna Maria Island in Cortez would be submerged. At 3 feet, only the highest areas of those communities would be habitable. At 4, 5, and 6 feet, stretches of the Bradenton and Palmetto riverfront would be gone, as well as the barrier islands. Similar problems would occur in southern Sarasota and Charlotte counties. Salt water would back up from Charlotte Harbor into both the Peace and Mayaca river basins. With 4, 5, and 6 foot rises, parts of Punta Gorda, Port Charlotte, and Northport would be flooded. Manasota Key would virtually disappear. But what can officials do to hold back the sea, or even prepare for such a rise?
It's one of those situations that's really tough to prepare for because we're surrounded by water. How do we get away from the water?
Marine sciences professor Gary Mitchum at the University of South Florida has spent most of his career studying sea level. He says it doesn't take much of a rise to cause problems.
Well, first thing you're going to notice is that nuisance flooding becomes much more frequent. If we have a high spring tide and you get the nuisance flood, instead of that happening now a couple of times a year, you're talking 10, 20 times a year.
Geologists have discovered a big part of why this is already happening. As the Atlantic and Gulf have risen, salt water has leaked into Florida's limestone aquifers. As they fill up with the ocean water, it's forcing the lighter, fresh water table up to near the surface, leaving hardly any space for rainwater to be absorbed into the ground.
For mitigating, in other words, for slowing it down, we have to worry about emissions.
Mitchum means carbon emissions, fossil fuels. The issue has sparked an intense political debate, but Mitchum says
there's no other way to deal with this except dealing with the emissions problem. In terms of what we can do, living on the beach and at low elevation, we have to start thinking about adaptation.
The Suncoast economy is driven by its beaches and the tourism they bring. But some are now asking how the rising tide will impact the most desirable properties, the ones right on the water. ABC7 weather forecaster Wendy Ross is also an 18-year veteran real estate agent on the Suncoast.
If you have to get a mortgage, that means you are going to be required, if you're in the V zone or the A zones, to have flood insurance. And those prices are going to continue to rise.
And even with the prospect of only the most wealthy being able to own waterfront property because they can afford the premiums or can self-insure, rising sea level may not mean we have to entirely stop building on the water, at least for a while.
We need to find a middle ground, the sweet spot. If the economics of building a hotel on the beach proves to be better than not building a hotel on the beach, even if you know it's going to be untenable in 50 years, then we may still need to do it. But for private individuals, that is a totally different economic issue.
Alan, this is like the elephant in the room. The sea level rise predictions keep getting worse, but nobody, at least on the local level, is talking about it.
Well, we will in just a moment, or a roundtable when we come back.